Chapter 27, Thunder and Lightning on Sinai. As we approach Mount Sinai, we come to the third highest peak after Moriah and Golgotha. We feel the thunder shake the earth beneath our feet, and the blinding flash of lightning bursting forth from the mountain. We are instilled with fear as we hear the words of God to Moses. Mark off a boundary all around the mountain. Warn the people, be careful. Do not go up on the mountain or even touch its boundaries. Anyone who touches the mountain will certainly be put to death. No hand may touch the person or animal that crosses the boundary. Instead, stone them or shoot them with arrows. They must be put to death. However, when the ram's horn sounds a long blast, then the people may go up on the mountain. Exodus 19:12-13. What terror this must have struck into the hearts of the people. As they come to the base of the mountain, we read, Moses led them out from the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. All of Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it in the form of fire. The smoke billowed into the sky like smoke from a brick kiln, and the whole mountain shook violently. Exodus 19:17-18. Blinding lightning, crashing thunder, billowing smoke, and an earthquake-like effect rocks the mountain. Is this the God of Jesus Christ? Is this the God of all comfort? The God who claims to be love, yet here is threatening to kill anyone who gets too close? Fast forward to the time of Elijah. The prophet is running for his life from the wicked Jezebel to the same Mount Sinai. Elijah spends the night at a cave on the mountain. The next morning, the Lord begins to speak to him. The prophet complains to the Lord of all his servants who have been killed by Jezebel and Ahab. He tells the Lord how zealous he has been for the truth. The zealousness which Elijah spoke of included his work of slaying the 450 prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. Zealousness evokes the sense of an indignation at evil done against the Lord. It arouses a man to act in God's defense, cutting down evil in its tracks. Elijah was full of fury at the wickedness of Ahab and his debased prophets. The Lord beckons Elijah forward to the mouth of the cave. As the Lord comes towards Elijah and passes by, suddenly a mighty wind smashed into the mountain and tore the rock face apart. Immediately after this, an earthquake violently shakes the mountain. But notice carefully what is recorded about this event. Go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. 1 Kings 19:11. The Lord is not in the wind or the earthquake. If the Lord is not in the wind or the earthquake, then what caused them? Let's continue the story to discover why. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" 1 Kings 19:12-13. God spoke to Elijah with a gentle, calming whisper, like a gentle mother calming her agitated child. Elijah had been running for his life. Many conflicting emotions were tumbling through his mind. In his zeal for God, he had killed 450 idolatrous men. He carried the disappointed hope of a nation who refused to step into the wake of his actions and help him reform the nation. Elijah's sense of justice and love for truth moved him to execute vengeance upon those leading the nation to ruin. It was like a fire in his soul that consumed him and made him single in his purpose and mission. As God approaches Elijah, it acts like a mirror of his soul, intensifying the thoughts and feelings within him. The Apostle Paul speaks to this phenomenon in this way: "But sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire. For apart from the law, sin was dead. I was alive once without the law. But when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died." Romans 7:8-9. Moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound. But where sin abounded, grace abounded much more. Romans 5:20. God is the living embodiment of the commandments. The law of God is a transcript of his own character. As the living law in the person of God moves towards Elijah, it produces in him all manner of evil desire. It causes sin to revive and become more powerful. But how does this happen? Pastor and teacher Alonzo T. Jones explains it this way, quote, "Yet it is also true that the very righteousness of God is in the law. Because the law is but the expression of the will of God, it is only the transcript of his character. And since this is so, it follows in the nature of the case that nobody can see in the law the righteousness of God. Nobody can find in the law the righteousness of God but God himself. And this only emphasizes the mighty truth that all that anybody, whether God or man, can ever see or find in the law is his own righteousness. On the part of man, this is sin, because it comes short of the righteousness of God. But on the part of God, it is righteousness, because it is the very righteousness of God in all perfection." End quote. A.T. Jones, Review and Herald, December 12, 1899. When men look into the law of God, they will use it to judge other men in order to validate or secure their own righteousness. Elijah could see the wickedness of other men, their debauchery and moral depravity. The law of God stirred up in him a sense of justice that encouraged him to execute judgment against evildoers. But on the part of man, this is sin because, as Jesus told those who wanted to stone the woman caught in adultery, only those without sin are in a position to execute judgment. Elijah was not without sin. Now consider carefully the effect of the lawgiver coming towards Elijah. The progression towards him can only increase, intensify, or magnify the thoughts Elijah has about God, justice, and the demand for the destruction of evil. Elijah was a faithful man of God. He walked in the law of God to the best of his knowledge. This reaction is different to when God or his angels approach wicked men. They do not feel the desire for justice on others, but rather feel the terror of God's justice against themselves. With regard to Elijah, I found that this Bible commentary appears to capture this thought. Quote, "As Elijah stepped out of the cave, a storm swept across the mountain, and an earthquake shook the ground. All seemed to be in commotion, with the heavens on fire and the earth convulsed by forces that seemed about to render it asunder. All this was in tune with the convulsive spirit of the prophet. What he needed to learn was that, mighty and moving though these forces be, they do not of themselves portray a true picture of the Spirit of God." End quote. Adventist Bible Commentary on 1 Kings 19:11-12. This process reminds me of my time of working on a farm. We prepared the soil, planted the seeds, and began to water the earth. Before the earth was watered, everything looked clean, straight, and in order. But when the water soaked into the earth, it caused everything in the earth to grow, both the good and the bad. The water is a symbol of the work of the Spirit of God. It grows whatever is in the soil. The soil is a symbol of the human heart. Any sin found in the heart will be manifested when the Spirit of God comes into the heart. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. And I tell you this, you must give an account on Judgment Day for every idle word you speak. The words you say will either acquit you or condemn you. Matthew 12:35-37. The Spirit grows the seed in the heart of man. If the seed is bad, it will convulse the soul, which in turn will convulse the earth around it. When this principle is understood, so many things which have seemed a mystery to us become clear and simple. When we understand the earth curse tool we have been using, it makes sense that the convulsions within the spirit of the prophet Elijah would manifest themselves in the earth. When the Lord comes close to Elijah, it intensifies this process. To the unobservant, it appears as God causing these violent commotions. But this masks the reality that nature is convulsed by human passion that is outside the commandments of God. This is why God appears hostile towards those who are hostile with wrong intentions towards others. To the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To those with integrity, you show integrity. To the pure, you show yourself pure. But to the wicked, you show yourself hostile. Psalm 18, 25-26. Let us never forget our Father in heaven is not in the wind, the earthquake, and the fire. These verses pinpoint the reality of natural disasters, as we discussed previously. The earth is also defiled under its inhabitants because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore the curse has devoured the earth, and those who dwell in it are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. Isaiah 24, 5-6. The Elijah story provides for us the context for Israel coming to the mountain of God. Josephus explains what happened when the people first came to the mountain and what they thought God would do to them. Quote, "So they passed 2 days in this way of feasting, but on the 3rd day, before the sun was up, a cloud spread itself over the whole camp of the Hebrews, such a one as none had before seen, and encompassed the place where they had pitched their tents. And while all the rest of the air was clear, there came strong winds that raised up large showers of rain, which became a mighty tempest. There was also such lightning as was terrible to those who saw it, and thunder with its thunderbolts were sent down, and declared God to be there present in a gracious way, to such as Moses desired he should be gracious. Now, as to these matters, every one of my readers may think as he pleases, but I am under a necessity of relating this history as it is described in the sacred books. This sight and the amazing sound that came to their ears disturbed the Hebrews to a prodigious degree, for they were not such as they were accustomed to. And then the rumor that was spread abroad, how God frequented that mountain, greatly astonished their minds. So they sorrowfully contained themselves within their tents, as both supposing Moses to be destroyed by the divine wrath and expecting the like destruction for themselves." End quote. Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, Book 3, Chapter 5. Notice carefully how the atmosphere changes due to the joy that Moses possessed in his thoughts about God. Quote, "When they were under these apprehensions, Moses appeared as joyful and greatly exalted. When they saw him, they were freed from their fear, and admitted of more comfortable hopes as to what was to come. The air also was become clear and pure of its former disorders upon the appearance of Moses. Whereupon he called together the people to a congregation in order to their hearing what God would say to them. End quote. Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, Book 3, Chapter 5. Moses was faithful to God, and God appeared faithful to him. The atmosphere changed. When the people came under the influence of Moses, their fears eased to the point that the stormy conditions abated. Now we can understand why the Lord sets bounds around the mountain, so the people would not come too close to him. It would intensify their perceptions of deity in the atmosphere. When the commandment comes, the sin within them would have revived and they would have died. Romans 7:9. The lightning, the thunder, the violent shaking of the mountain, the thick cloud, all of this was a manifestation of their thoughts of deity, their perceptions of justice, and their terror of this being that seemed more like Zeus to them than the Father of Jesus Christ. Our Father desired to speak to them in a gentle whisper, but what they heard when God spoke was like thunder, and their fears returned. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Then they said to Moses, "You speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die." Exodus 20:18-19. When the people heard the voice of God, they felt they would die in fear. All of this was a mirror of their perceptions of God, which, combined with their own impact on nature, caused the environment around them to convulse. The sound of the voice of God changes depending on the listener. The Bible records this phenomenon when Jesus was on earth and his Father spoke. "Father, bring glory to your name." Then a voice spoke from heaven saying, "I have already brought glory to my name, and I will do so again." When the crowd heard the voice, some thought it was thunder, while others declared an angel had spoken to him. John 12:28-29. Those in the Old Covenant hear thunder, while those in the New Covenant hear an angelic voice speaking. As we recall, the New Covenant is looking at the Father through the life of Jesus on earth. All the events of Mount Sinai might have been different if the people had joyfully listened to what God had asked them. Notice carefully what God said as the literal Hebrew expresses it. "And now, if ye really hearken to my voice, then ye have kept my covenant, and been to me a peculiar treasure more than all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and ye are to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou dost speak unto the sons of Israel." Exodus 19:5-6, Young's literal translation. God simply asked them to listen to his voice. his gentle, whispering voice. Just listening is keeping the covenant. That was it. He told them that they already were to him a kingdom of priests. They didn't have to do anything to become this. It was already a fact because God determined it was so. And all the people responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has commanded." So Moses brought the people's answer back to the Lord. Exodus 19:8. The response of the people was to tell God, "Everything you have commanded, we will do." But there was only one thing to do, and that was to listen. The rest was already given to them. They didn't have to do anything. This proves they were not truly listening. They heard God's words, but they did not do them. They heard the law, but they forgot their inability to do anything. And this prevented God from helping them into his path, his way of thinking. For if you listen to the word and don't obey, it is like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and forget what you look like. James 1:23-24. Israel told God that they would do the things God had already given to them. What should have happened is that they should have wept for joy at the goodness of God in giving them everything for free. They should have confessed their sins and told the Lord they were sorry for all they had done to him. And they should have said, "We believe you will do what you have said." But they didn't. Paul tells us that Mount Sinai represents bondage. The people promised the impossible. No man can promise to fulfill God's commandments because none of us have any ability to do righteousness from ourselves. We note what Paul says about the Mount Sinai experience. These two women serve as an illustration of God's two covenants. The first woman, Hagar, represents Mount Sinai, where people received the law that enslaved them. And now Jerusalem is just like Mount Sinai in Arabia, because she and her children live in slavery to the law. Galatians 4:24-25. It would be better to say that the people enslaved themselves to the law by trying to do themselves what God promised to do for them. Paul calls this experience the first or Old Covenant. Israel was doing exactly what Abraham did with Hagar, trying to fulfill the promises of God themselves. Once they committed themselves to this process, God could only reveal to the people their own thinking. He could only cause sin to abound in them in the hope of bringing them to the new covenant, or Jerusalem above. The people said they would do everything God wanted. He asked them to listen. When he spoke, they told Moses to tell God to stop speaking because they feared they would die. Right here, they broke the covenant with God. They disobeyed him. In addressing the people in the Old Covenant, God still is seeking to teach them and draw them into the new. As he introduces the 10 Commandments, he says, I am the Lord your God, who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. Exodus 20:2. In the context of being already rescued, God then speaks the commandments. I will quote from our usual version of the New Living Translation to show what they heard, and then I will quote from the Young's Literal Translation to show what God said. You will easily see the difference. I will condense the longer commandments in this list. You must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind, or an image of anything in the heavens, or on the earth, or in the sea. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and mother. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife. Exodus 20:3-17, New Living Translation. Now once again, as God intended it. Thou hast no other gods before me. Thou dost not make to thyself a graven image, or any likeness which is in the heavens above, or which is in the earth beneath, or which is in the waters under the earth. Thou dost not take up the name of Jehovah thy God for a vain thing. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. Honor thy father and thy mother. Thou dost not murder. Thou dost not commit adultery. Thou dost not steal. Thou dost not answer against thy neighbor a false testimony. Thou dost not desire the house of thy neighbor. Thou dost not desire the wife of thy neighbor. Exodus 20:3-17, Young's Literal Translation. The two different translations reflect the two covenants. The first translation interprets the text and a demand that God requires of them. But God only told them to listen to his voice. He did not tell them to do anything else. The literal Hebrew version shows you the true meaning of what God told them. Because I have rescued you, you will not do these things, because you will have my spirit in you. But the people were terrified listening to God speak. To them it felt like Zeus talking with thunder and lightning. Moses was much calmer than the rest of the people, and as mediator, he helped them so much. Don't be afraid, Moses answered them, for God has come in this way to test you, and so that your fear of him will keep you from sinning. Exodus 20:20. But even though Moses was less fearful than the others, the Bible still tells us that Moses became afraid. For they heard an awesome trumpet blast and a voice so terrible that they begged God to stop speaking. They staggered back under God's command. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. Moses himself was so frightened at the sight that he said, I am terrified and trembling. Hebrews 12:19-21. This reveals that Moses still partly looked at God through the Old Covenant lens. His perception of God was not perfect. We know this in part because 13 chapters later, Moses says, "Show me your glory," meaning he wants to know God's character. If Moses knew God already, he would not have asked this question. It was evident that he still had things to learn about God's character. The fear Moses experienced reveals he was not yet made perfect in love. Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment, and this shows that we have not fully experienced his perfect love. 1 John 4:18. Moses still held the view of the need for punishment for sin. This leads to fear of punishment ourselves. In this context, Moses shows an amazing level of love for his people when he offers his own life in place of sinful Israel. "But now, if you will only forgive their sin, but if not, erase my name from the record you have written." Exodus 32:32. It is a beautiful gesture in a wrong context. Moses shows he still believed death was needed for gross sinful conduct, and thus his dying for another would be acceptable to God. This is the reason he was still succumbed to terrified trembling. Due to the fact that Israel was not listening to God, and that they also didn't want to, the Lord had to give them instructions which reflected their own way of thinking. Telling the Lord, "All that the Lord has commanded we will do," was a pivotal moment. It meant everything that God spoke from this point forward was a reflection of their own thinking. The people believed in stoning, killing, and destroying those considered evil. They desired sacrifice and offering, and so the Lord gave to them the things they wanted to magnify their own thinking. "Therefore, I also gave them up to statutes that were not good, and judgments by which they could not live." Ezekiel 20:25. We will cover this in more detail in a future chapter, but it is vital to understand that many of the statutes and judgments God gave were statutes in harmony with the people's own thinking. Why did he do this? For the simple reason that they were not listening to what he was saying. He could only give them what they wanted, or they would refuse to listen. How wicked is the human heart! How gracious is our Father to walk with his deluded children who are wise in their own eyes and do things according to their own desires. Exodus 21 begins to list commands which the people want. However, if someone deliberately kills another person, then the slayer must be dragged even from my altar and be put to death. Anyone who strikes father or mother must be put to death. Kidnappers must be put to death, whether they are caught in possession of their victims or have already sold them as slaves. Anyone who dishonors father or mother must be put to death. Exodus 21, 14 to 17. If the people had believed God and listened to his voice, he could have given them his Spirit to be able to do the 10 Commandments. But seeking to do them in their own strength, which is enslaving themselves to the commandments, meant God had to condescend to give them death penalties, sacrifices, and commands to deal with the hardness of their hearts. If Israel had listened to God's voice, they never would have committed adultery or desired a second wife. But by saying all that the Lord has said we will do, God had to give them laws like this. If a man who has married a slave wife takes another wife for himself, he must not neglect the rights of the first wife to food, clothing, and sexual intimacy. Exodus 21:10. This is a commandment for a man who has hardened his heart. Taking a second wife is cruel to both wives. It simply says to the first wife, "You are not enough for me." Jesus spoke specifically of the divorce commandment as having been given due to man's hardness of heart. Suppose a man marries a woman, but she does not please him. Having discovered something wrong with her, he writes her a letter of divorce, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house. When she leaves his house, she is free to marry another man. Deuteronomy 24:1-2. Some Pharisees came and tried to trap him, Jesus, with this question: should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? Jesus answered them with a question. What did Moses say in the law about divorce? Well, he permitted it, they replied. He said a man can give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away. But Jesus responded, he wrote this commandment only as a concession to your hard hearts. Mark 10:2-5. Jesus tells us plainly the true intention of marriage. But God made them male and female from the beginning of creation. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. Mark 10:6-9. Marriage was intended for the entire period of this earthly life. God never wanted divorce. In fact, the Bible says he hates divorce. For I hate divorce, says the Lord, the God of Israel. To divorce your wife is to overwhelm her with cruelty, says the Lord of heaven's armies. So guard your heart. Do not be unfaithful to your wife. Malachi 2:16. In this context, we can see many of the statutes God gave were given because of the hardness of the hearts of the people. They do not reflect the character of our Father, but they were given because the people would not listen to the gentle whispering voice of God, but understood God as thunder and lightning and determined to do God's commandments in their own way. How sad to realize that as the Israelites looked to the top of Mount Sinai, they only saw God as a destroying, consuming fire. To the Israelites at the foot of the mountain, the glory of the Lord appeared at the summit like a consuming fire. Exodus 24:17. For all these reasons, it is not safe to go up Mount Sinai outside the mediation of the character of Christ. The closer you come to God on this mountain, the more likely you will destroy yourself. Promising to keep God's commandments while not resting in His Spirit and pleading for grace leads to insanity or death. Some of the most horrendous communities of human history have fashioned themselves around the laws of Moses and tried to enforce them according to their own understanding. How then can we know which commandments reflect the character of God and which ones are rules given to accommodate man in his fallen thinking? Look to Jesus. What commandments did He live by? Christ is the positive expression of the law. He kept all of the 10 commandments. He kept the Sabbath and the feasts. He believed in the sanctity of marriage. And of course there are more, but Jesus shows us which are the positive commandments to observe. All the rest are accommodations to men seeking to serve God in their own way. But didn't Jesus say, "I have not come to destroy the law or the prophets, not in the slightest amount"? Matthew 5:17-18. This is true because the law given to Moses was the schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. Galatians 3:24. It must not be removed. It must not be discarded. It must be studied and followed for all who begin the Christian journey. For all have sinned and are unconverted when they begin. The law as given is the diagnostic tool to reveal the true depravity of the human condition. You can't remove any of it because much of it is a mirror into the human heart. As we grow in the knowledge of the Lord Jesus, He teaches us which laws were given which are not good and reflect human nature, and which are truly of His character. He teaches us how to cause sacrifice and offering to cease. Daniel 9:27. I hope that after giving this subject some consideration, Mount Sinai does not give to us a picture of God who uses lightning and thunder to terrify people into obedience, but rather a mirror of human perceptions of God. It is a tragic tale of caution which landed the Israelites outside the desires of our Father in heaven. Yet, regardless of all these things, we still received the 10 Commandments, the most precious document ever given to the human race. May we hear them through the still, small voice, rather than through lightning and thunder.